public comment. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
No, Chair, we do not.
Item 3A, consideration of an action on the minutes of the February 27th, 2025 meeting. You've got the minutes in your packets. Do I hear a motion? Got a motion approved by Commissioner Landine and a second from Commissioner Brown. Any further discussion? Please vote. That passes 8-0. Thank you, Commissioners. Item 4, we are going to take up a proposed rezoning of 8.041 acres from interim standard single-family residential district R1I to Lexington Commons Plan Development, Final Development Plan, located between US Highway 59 and Lexington Boulevard along Ditch H, further described as 8.041 acres of land located in the Alexander Hodge League, Abstract 32, and being a portion of Tract 5, Part 5, as described in slide number 1655B and 1656A FBCPR. We'll hear staff presentation first, then I will open the public hearing, and then we'll move on to consideration action. Good evening, it's all yours.
Good evening. Bear with me tonight, guys. I have quite a few slides. So as a little overview for this rezoning, this is a rezoning to a planned development district. Planned development districts can be adopted through either a general development plan or a final development plan. A general development plan, or GDP, is an interim step, which when a detailed development plan is not available for proposed development, a GDP does not provide a property owner any development rights, but rather a path to submit an FDP and essentially guidelines for which the FDP submittal will be. And then FDPs must be submitted within 2 years of the approval of a GDP. For a final development plan, or an FDP, it's a one step that combines both the GDP and FDP process, in which case tonight is just an FDP. If a GDP is approved first before an FDP, the FDP must substantially comply with the GDP. So for this PD, the final development plan is known as Lexington Commons, which is located in Tract 5 between US 59 and Lexington Boulevard, adjacent to Ditch H. Again, it's approximately 8 acres, and the FDP, or final development plan, includes 3 office buildings, 2 parking garages, and then limited surface parking adjacent to US 59, and to be developed in 2 phases. Phase 1 includes the 2 office buildings adjacent to Ditch H, and then the 1 parking garage in between those 2 office buildings, as well as the surface parking, and then the interior circulation, which is the fire lanes and the private access easement. And then phase 2 is to include the remaining office building and parking garage at the center of the site. The final development plan also includes 2 site plan layouts, which are exhibits B2 and B2T. Exhibit B2 includes 2 connections to Lexington Boulevard, which is required in order to meet the access requirements for this development. And then exhibit B2T includes both the 2 connections to Lexington Boulevard, as well as the additional connection to US Highway 59 eastbound frontage road. The reason for both the site layouts being included in the final development plan is at the time of the submittal, the applicant did not have approval from TxDOT to have that second, or the curb cut along the eastbound frontage. By the time of this presentation, they have received that approval. So here is the exhibit B2, which includes both the connections along Lexington Boulevard. And then, as you can see in exhibit B2T, it includes that additional connection point to the eastbound frontage road along US 59 feeder road. So as you can see, phase 1, which there's a phasing plan in the corner of this exhibit, includes the 2 office buildings adjacent to Ditch H, as well as this parking garage. The maximum height for buildings 1 and 2 is 35 feet, measured from ground level. And then the maximum height of parking garage 1 is 55 feet. And then for the 2 buildings, the parking garage and building 3 at the center of the site that's to be developed in phase 2, the maximum height for both of these structures is 90 feet. So this is the pedestrian circulation plan, which is Exhibit B5. For the pedestrian circulation, signage, and landscaping plans, those again include both site layouts. So for the pedestrian circulation plan, you can see that the existing 8-foot wide sidewalk along Lexington Boulevard is highlighted. And then you can also see the pedestrian walkways that are proposed within the development, since it's supposed to be pedestrian oriented. And then as well as the continuation of those pedestrian walkways across the drive aisles to provide connectivity between the office buildings and the parking garages, as well as the parking garage and office buildings to Lexington Boulevard. And again, this is the pedestrian circulation plan with that extra curb cut. And then for the landscape plan, there are shade trees provided for the perimeter of this site, specifically along the buildings that are adjacent to Ditch H to provide additional screening and reduce the visual impact of these buildings. Trees are also proposed within the development to provide shade along the pedestrian walkways that connect the buildings to the parking garages. And here is the landscape plan with that additional curb cut. The final development plan also includes conceptual elevations for the 2 parking garages. As you can see for parking garage 1, it's proposed to have brick on the eastern elevation that's adjacent to Ditch H to reduce the visual impact of the structure that can be seen from the residential neighborhood that's across the ditch. And then for parking garage 2, it is also proposed to be constructed of brick on the side of the parking garage that's going to be visible from Lexington Boulevard. The proposed final development plan is consistent with the Telford General Land Plan. The General Land Plan identifies this area as commercial and to be developed through a planned development district. And it's also consistent with the City of Sugar Land's land use plan. The land use plan identifies this area as the University Boulevard Regional Activity Center. This RAC is envisioned to be an office and an entertainment-centric walkable development with supporting retail. This RAC also includes Smart Financial, Texas Instruments, and the University of Houston Sugar Land campus. The land use plan identifies building heights within this RAC to taper to low rise when the edge of the RAC is facing residential, so along this side. And here's an excerpt from the future land use map that shows that this site is identified as Regional Activity Center. Because this is a public hearing, all the public hearing notification requirements were met. Notification was posted in the newspaper as well as on the city's website, and property owners within 200 feet of the property were notified. A courtesy sign was also placed on the property. Since this property didn't have any residential within 200 feet of it, the city also included messaging regarding this public hearing on the city's next door page, and the applicant team also hosted a community meeting for residents from the surrounding neighborhoods on February 17th of 2025. Staff did receive one public comment form. It was just a homeowner wanting more information on the proposed final development plan, but staff is not aware of any opposition to the request. A few points for consideration before I hand it over to the applicant for their slides. This FDP is in alignment with the City of Sugar Land Land Use Plan, the Telford Development Agreement, and the Telford General Land Plan. The specific use list that's included in the final development plan primarily focuses on professional and medical office uses with limited retail and services. Fleet vehicle storage, outdoor storage, and drive-through lanes are prohibited from this final development plan, and the office buildings and parking garage adjacent to Ditch H are lower in height as identified through the land use plan. And the engineering staff has reviewed and cleared comments for the traffic impact analysis for the site, which was a requirement of the submittal, and the traffic impact analysis include both site layout plans. With that, staff is recommending that the commission hold a public hearing followed by consideration action, and staff supports a recommendation of approval to members of City Council for the proposed Lexington Commons final development plan. But before the public hearing, the applicant has prepared some slides.
Good evening. Chair and members of P&Z, along with staff, I really thank you for this opportunity to present Lexington Commons project, and also thank Jessica for their hard work on getting the document finished. So a little bit about, let's see, I'm supposed to be doing this right. let's see here. So a little bit about us, for those of you that don't know us, we're the developer of First Colony, and we've developed multiple office, mixed use, and retail projects over the past 43 years.
And Don, we know who you are. Would you just give a quick introduction for the record?
Sure. Don Jansen with Plan Community Developers. Thank you. So these are a few of our projects. You're very familiar with most of those. Our goal is to develop Class A projects, benefiting all the stakeholders, dedication to long-term meaningful relationships, and a continuing track record of solution-driven personal customer service. So in talking about Lexington Commons, I'm probably going to be a bit repetitive with some of what she just said, so I'll try not to be repetitive as much as possible. But it's an 8-acre mixed-use development, including Class A medical office buildings, retail, restaurants, centered on a pedestrian-oriented plaza. So the reason why we think it's a good idea is we've done a lot of market research on Class A medical office in the immediate area, and there are very low vacancy rates in the Class A MOBs. So our strategy is to build a walkable Class A medical office campus supported by structured parking, and then add a mixed-use retail and restaurant component in a green space, which it further differentiates our project from other options, which I would say that none of the other medical office buildings include a mixed-use component. They're just a building on the freeway with no green space and no support services. The other reason why I think it's a good idea is because with the MD Anderson campus that's going to be locating next door, a lot of doctors and vendors and people that want to be very close to that can't actually occupy buildings within MD Anderson. And so we're kind of hoping that we'll be the next best option for them. We also think it would be a great option for the employees and the visitors of that project if we have retail and restaurants that are within walkable, convenient walkable area to all those services. I think that it'll get a lot of use by the MD Anderson visitors, employees, and support our project. So this is where it gets repetitive. This is the locations on the south side of 59, west of the Crescent Lakes and Lexington Meadows neighborhoods. This shows the adjacent owners, which is MD Anderson and the city of Sugar Land. I'm going to skip that just for a minute. And so this includes, as we've talked about, 3 medical office buildings, 2 garages that are going to be phased. So the 2 buildings that are to the east, which are closest to the neighborhoods, are both 2 stories with a garage. That's phase 1. And phase 2 would be the larger office building that's to the west and the parking garage. So we talked about it a little bit. One incredible thing that we got was the curb cut off of Highway 5969, which none of the other projects on either side of the freeway, all the other medical office buildings, all they have are more what I would say a general curb cut that leads into the project. Ours is the only one that has a curb cut that leads directly into our project. So the owner of this has worked for 3 years to get this from TxDOT. Nothing is fast with TxDOT, but we just received that approval. The other thing that it does, by having direct access off the freeway, there's a bit of a sensitivity to traffic on Lexington, which is really more the neighborhoods. So this is going to provide the opportunity for those driving on the Southwest Freeway to go directly into the project. They don't even have to go on Lexington if they don't want to. They can go right back out. So I think that's a huge advantage for us. There's also the pedestrian circulation, which Jessica mentioned, along Lexington Boulevard, which is an 8-foot walkway that exists. In addition to that, there's going to be access along, it's called Future Bayou Trail on this map, but there's going to be a walking trail that will go north-south all the way along the bayou immediately behind our project. So let me go back to slide 7, because this is an example of some options that we're considering that would provide, let's just say, whether it's retail or restaurant, these are examples of what we could do in the green space. And although it's a small green space, one of these examples is almost exactly the same size. So the top left is Rupor, which you're very familiar with that, at the base of the Texas Drive building, restaurant with outdoor dining. The top right is a project that's over on the Katy Freeway. It's called Village Tower Plaza. And at the base of the parking garage, there's this area, and I know it's not zoomed in too much, but there are tables that support the restaurants as well as green space. And in addition to that, it allows us a planting area because there's always a sensitivity towards screening the parking garage. So as you can see in this example, there are trees, bushes, and things to basically buffer the parking garage. The bottom left is actually the restaurant is Bella Green, but that's in City Center. And so you can see there are seating areas on the foreground, and then behind it you can see people enjoying the green space. And then the bottom right is the plaza just outside this window. So those are examples of what we're going to do. It's not a large space, but it's large enough to be basically the top right-hand side, which provide a nice green space for restaurants as well as retail. So now I'm going to jump to this one. So this is where you start seeing the dimensions and the three-dimensional look at the buildings. You'll notice that both of the buildings on the bottom are the low-rise, and then it basically increases to the larger building to the west, away from closer to the residences, if you would. And this is a perspective actually from the MD Anderson campus. What's interesting about this is it shows the dimension or the distance between these buildings and the first home, which is 546 feet. So that bayou is extremely wide, so there's a great separation, just a natural separation between those two. This shows a visual from the backyard of the homes that are on Caladium Drive, which is the Lexington Meadows subdivision. So as you see the sight line across, behind each one of these is the berm that creates the levee, as well as an 8-foot fence. So if you look at the sight line, you see very little of the buildings. You basically see of the two larger buildings, which are the garage and the office building, that medical office building that's to the west. That's how much you can see of those. And then this is from the backyard with the 8-foot fence behind it. You can see how much of the building can be viewed. This is actually from Caladium Street. So you've got the homes in between the buildings, but it just shows what someone that's driving on that street would see. And this is a neighborhood view on Lexington Boulevard. If you know where the roundabout is, then this is basically almost to the roundabout looking back. This is from on the south side of Lexington, which is the Austin Meadow Way cul-de-sac. This is out their backyard. This is from the end of the cul-de-sac. That's the view. And all you can really see there is the bridge structure, which is kind of in the background next to that telephone pole. And this is just a perspective that we shot. So this is across the freeway behind Best Buy. And as you look across, it's the same levee height. And as you look across from there, on the right, in the middle, I guess, of this drawing is a 3-story building. To the left of that is a 2-story medical office building. So the only thing you would add to this would be the 8-foot fence that's actually behind the street, behind the homes, which actually even protects even more of the view. So that's an overview of Lexington Commons. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, at this time, I'm going to open the public hearing. We will receive and hear all persons desiring to be heard on the proposed rezoning of 8.041 acres from interim standard single-family residential district R1I to Lexington Commons Plan Development Final Development Plan, located between US Highway 59 and Lexington Boulevard along Ditch H. Further described as 8.041 acres of land located in the Alexander Hodge League. Abstract 32 and being a portion of Tract 5, Part 5 is described in slide number 1655B and 1656A, FBCPR. It looks like we have one person signed up for public comment. Colby Curtis. How'd I do?
Hi, thank you. Colby Curtis, and I live at 3914 Wood Hollow Court here in First Colony. I'm here tonight to add my name to the list of those in support of Lexington Commons final development plan. I'm a commercial real estate broker, and I've lived and worked in Sugar Land for over 35 years. 10 years ago, my partner and I represented Newland Development to sell the Telfair commercial tracts along Highway 59. On the south side of the freeway, we sold the 50-acre tract to Fluor, the 8-acre tract to Texas Instruments, which Mr. Jansen developed, and the 8-acre tract to the state of Texas for the development of the MD Anderson Hospital. Over my commercial career, medical office buildings, the development product being proposed in the PD being discussed tonight, has proven to be significantly more stable than most other alternative development products. One reason for that is the cost of the interior improvements and the cost of the fixtures and equipment in medical office buildings. Those costs will substantially exceed that of a traditional use office building. For that reason, the lease terms are generally longer and the rents in the building are higher. Due to the higher investment costs, the tenant turnover in MOBs is far lower than traditional office buildings. In addition, the creditworthiness of the medical tenants and doctors in a MOB is substantially higher. Sorry, I'm having trouble with my phone. All of these factors will add value not only to the buildings, but also to the city and the surrounding Telfair commercial development. In summary, I feel that the proposed use of the Lexington Common PD is a perfect complement to what is planned by MD Anderson for the tract next door. And thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, sir. Do we have anyone else for public comment? Go ahead. Did you come on up and did you fill out a form?
I did.
Let's see if we can take care of that real quick, please, so we'll have a clean record. All right, sir?
Where do I do that?
Wherever city staff tells you to go. Don't leave me in charge of logistics. Just give them a form and you fill it out after and give it over here so we have it. But if you want to speak now, go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
But just please, let's do that for the record so that we have it.
Hello.
And start with your name and address, please.
Okay, my
Thank
name
you.
is Mark Levinson, and I rent a property at 2600 Cortez Drive. It's a pharmacy, and I've been driving in the neighborhood for a few years now, and I noticed PCD is finally developing the project. It looks very impressive, and I think it will be a good addition to the community, creating many, many jobs. And it will add a lot of value to the area here. I like the well-planned building allocation, and it's just what you would expect from PCD. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to, share my thoughts about that project. I would highly recommend to the P&Z committee for the approval of the PD. Thank you very much.
Thanks, sir.
Okay.
And please be sure you fill out that form. Do we have anyone else that would like to address the commission in public comment on this agenda item? Last call. All right, I said a public comment, public hearing. Anyone else want to address the commission in public hearing on this agenda item? All right, then I will close the public hearing and we'll move on to consideration and action. I'll read it in a minute, but do we have questions for staff?
One question. So right where the residential, where he showed the 546 feet on the levee, where the parking garage, you can see like a little bit of it. What about lighting? Would the lights affect the homeowners? Would they be able to see?
The lights of the parking garage adjacent or
Yeah.
the one in the center of the site?
The one in the center.
So we have regulations in the standard code that have it, so they were adopted in 2020, I believe, and they have it so that the lighting directs straight down.
Straight down.
So that it wouldn't be affecting adjacent properties.
And what about the one that's adjacent?
It wouldn't be visible, but it would also have to follow those lighting requirements that are in the standard code.
And then the other question I had was on the levee, it said parks and open spaces. How much of that green space is usable parks and open spaces?
Can you direct me to which?
This is the slide.
Oh, so that is an excerpt from the future land use map. That's just the land use category.
Okay.
It's just open space. It's not going to be developed as anything. So that's why it's categorized that way.
Gotcha. That's all. Thank you so much for putting this together.
Mary, go ahead.
Yep. Thanks, everyone, for your presentations. They were really informative. But one thing I had for clarity, I mean, we've got these taller garages, but then you'd also talked about in the second building that there could be like retail on the bottom and then parking on top of that as well.
In garage 2. So the final development plan is written in a way that only garage 2 would be allowed to have retail on the first floor.
So aesthetically, was there reasoning about that? Because it seems like the garages are going to be much taller than the actual buildings. So are they going to tower over the buildings themselves?
We can go back to those.
Do you want me to do the
Like our
elevations?
pictures.
Do you want me to do the elevations or pictures?
Let's do the pictures, because I think that's a good question, but
'Cause it's not a real big space, so is it going to look like all garage and some buildings?
well, no, that's a good question. So if you look at the top right, it's
Yeah.
almost identical to what we're talking about. So you have a garage over a green space. And so as far as towering over it, it's definitely going to be taller, but there's going to be an open space. In other words, there's not a garage over the green space.
Correct, but then the other garage, there's just a parking garage that at least, in going through the plans, will be taller than that actual building, or not?
No, it's not going to be taller.
Okay, so, but the one in phase 1 will be?
Yes, well, it's actually the same height.
It-
The height of the garage is,
Oh, it was 35
Yeah.
feet and 55 feet.
Yeah, so,
okay, yes, you're right. I'm so sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
the garage is taller than the building.
I got it.
Yeah,
That is correct.
Yeah, so for the buildings that are adjacent to, so buildings 1 and 2, those are going to be a maximum of 35 feet in height. And then parking garage 1 is going to be a maximum of 55 feet in height. But
Right.
that one is not going to include first floor retail.
Right,
It's only
so-
parking garage 2.
so when you're giving those views, what people will see if they see anything is just parking garage, correct?
Yes, the top of parking garage 2, which is a maximum height of 90 feet as well as building 3.
Yeah, except they're further away from the residential. I'm just concerned that it's sort of going to look like buildings and then this tower parking garage. So if you added them to the other buildings, like if you had your retail and then added on top, it would maybe even it out. But
On top
that's-
of the first floor
of
retail
the
as well?
retail, you're right. So if
Okay.
if we need that much parking, could you add it to the other buildings and not be so tall? It's just a comment, but yeah, I mean, understand.
So there's parking behind the retail. So it's actually just the front is the retail and behind it is
Correct.
actually parking. So it's just one level of retail and parking. So it's not like you're putting parking above all the retail?
Right, but you are on the second building, correct? I mean, that's sort of some of your plans is
Just
to
the front
have
half. The front, you're talking about the building or the
the
garage?
building.
So the
So it's,
building,
okay, so back up. So phase 2, as I understand, is a big parking garage,
that's correct.
and then another building with retail and parking on top of it.
It's just the front corner is going to be retail. So it'd be like, once again, the examples, if you take, like if you looked right across and you saw the what's the bar right there?
Bar Louie?
Yeah, Bar Louie. Thank you very much. So if you look at that, that's a good example of what we're talking about. You have retail at the base and a building above it.
Correct.
So that's what we're talking about.
Okay. In phase 2, but in phase 1, it's sheer parking garage and 2 buildings
Right, with no retail.
with no retail.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's what we're trying to give
I
the.
understand you. I mean, it was just a question about it aesthetically. I mean, I understand this is the plan, but it just seems like in that first phase, you're going to have a big, tall parking garage and 2 other buildings, so it may tower over it. And that's what the residents would see. Maybe not the buildings, but it sounds like they're going to see the parking garage, correct?
Well, they're only going to see, well,
A
no,
little
they're
bit
not
at the
going to be
top
able to
of it.
see,
Not in phase
they're not going to
one.
see any of it in phase 1. If you look at the dimension, the
So it'll
site,
only be the 90-foot one.
That's correct.
Can you put up the sight line?
yeah.
Okay, because I thought on that one, it was the 35-foot one, so my mistake.
So that's See, if you see the foreground on the right-hand side where you see that first garage, you don't see any of
that
it
was the
from
first building.
the back building.
Okay.
You're going to see the other one.
Yeah.
That's a good question. No, I
Yeah.
understand.
So, and the only other question I had is on the signage. Does the signage go back to what the standards are in Sugar Land? That's just the standard?
Yes,
that we
so
have for-
the only regulations in the final development plan are for the freeway signage.
Yeah.
Everything else is going to default to Chapter 4 of the Development Code.
Okay, thank you.
AP?
Telfair has their own development guidelines Telfair has their own development guidelines as well. So there's like 2 layers of standard for the signs.
Yes, they do.
I had a couple of questions just around traffic, and you mentioned it at a high level, and I know TxDOT is very difficult to deal with, but you mentioned that the TIA came back with some roadway improvements. Can you detail what exactly they chose to improve and how that's going to be better?
Yes, I can have our traffic engineering manager speak to that.
Evening, Commissioners. I'm Jason Vaughn, Traffic Engineering Manager for the city's engineering department. Hopefully, am I too loud? So with the TIA, I had a couple of recommendations, but they were based on the 2 different plans, one without the driveway to the frontage road and one with the driveway to the frontage road. Without the driveway, the only access would have been from Lexington Boulevard. And in the TIA analysis, we saw a high amount of traffic turning off at 59 Frontage Road on Taborwood. That's a short street from the frontage road over to Lexington. And there was a high left turn traffic because about 95% of the traffic going to the site would have to go through Lexington. And that, so there was a recommendation for a double left turn lane, which is a little tricky because that would also impact site traffic going in for the Smart Financial.
Smart, yeah.
And that, so we would discuss the possibility if we're looking at a double left turn lane, just make it a sign and then maybe a flip sign for the event to convert it back to 3 lanes. And that, but as Don mentioned earlier, if they got TxDOT approval, then they'll be looking at the second option. The second option being the driveway connected to the frontage road. The city, we required if they would go ahead and look at the turning volumes for a deceleration lane into the site. And so that's the second recommendation. For the second option, the recommendation is for the driveways to add a deceleration lane on the frontage road. So as when cars are coming in and they're slowing down to turn to the site, they have a separate lane to turn into. They wouldn't be slowing down in the through lane. So that was the second recommendation, Commissioner.
Okay.
Also, the fact is it's a adequate distance from the exit ramp. In that, let me get my notes. In that, roughly looking about 800 foot from the exit ramp from 59. So adding the deceleration lane also adds an additional safety improvement that drivers can get over and slow down in the deceleration lane, just like you have for the deceleration lane turning into Smart Financial. In that, so that was the 2 recommendations.
Excellent, thank you. And staying on the Smart Financial topic, because there's obviously a lot of traffic, and the medical office part of this won't be impactful, but for the mixed use, the retail, were there any concerns about any traffic after Smart Financial events and traffic coming in and out of this complex?
For the TIA, we asked the consultant to take a look at that, look at the weekday PM peak during those smart financial events, and also for the weekend. Since there was a percentage of retail and restaurant, we looked at all of the critical uses in the TIA. And that, like Jessica says, our permitted uses, they may or may not be in there, and there is a small percentage.
Yeah, it depends.
Check with
Yeah.
Jessica on that. But we did take a look at that. It did not, basically, we look at a build, no build situation. So, some of the intersections like 59 Universities already has like critical amount of volumes and during events, but we didn't see a significant impact with additional site traffic added.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay.
Last question, and it's more of a curiosity. I know we talked about the medical office vacancy rates and how stable that is. Do we keep track of vacancy rates for that submarket, or do we look at office vacancy, that percentage as a whole in the city? I was just curious if we had a number for the medical office space vacancy rates.
I don't know if it's specific to the medical office, but I'm sure our economic development team does have vacancy rates for office buildings.
I was just curious, because there's a whole set of medical office on the opposite side of the freeway behind Telfair, so I was just curious if that was all considered and looked at as robust as the market is for medical office. I was just curious if that was
Not
based
specific
on...
to this site,
On
no.
rates, vacancy rates. Okay, that's all I had.
Commissioner Brown?
Good evening. First question is for staff. The February 17th meeting that you had, what was the attendance like from that neighborhood? Did you have 5 people there, 55 people?
The room was full.
The room was full. And
60 people apparently signed in.
so 50 people, and no objections, right? That's what you conveyed to, wow, there you go.
I would say there were people who didn't want development, but majority of people were happy that this is what was proposed for the site.
Okay. Second question is, and this is for Don, the restaurant and the retail that you're putting in place, you talked about that, right? So that's phase 1 on the southerly building, is that what I'm understanding?
The retail and the restaurant?
The restaurant?
It's actually phase 2.
It's going to be phase 2, okay.
That's correct.
And will that be facing Smart Financial Center? Are you looking at tying that in so that traffic to Smart Financial Center would have a restaurant to go to, or is this a daytime restaurant? What are you envisioning?
We hope every person that goes to Smart Financial comes to this
there?
restaurant. Yeah.
Okay, I figured as much.
But so we would love for that to happen. We're also looking at the garages because they're not going to be used at night, could provide overflow parking potentially. So, I mean, we see a great marriage there between the events at Smart and this project.
Okay. You showed the fences. That are they in your sight line reflected, or in your conversation said that they were 8-foot fences? Is that verified? That's what those are? Because my fences in my backyard are 6, so I didn't know if we're sure they're 8 or
So
that would affect the sight line.
So our architect, Gensler, went out and actually measured those
Okay,
fences.
we're good.
So, well, I didn't measure them, they did, so I'm taking their word for that.
Okay.
So,
Because that would affect sight line, right? If they were shorter. So trust me, I know.
yep. But I would say this, the levee is 6 feet. So at a minimum, it's going to be 6, no matter what.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
In the narrative for staff, this in here, the narrative doesn't get codified into the PD, right? This is just telling the story.
It's just the
because it's
staff
talking
report.
about that the parking garage is constructed of brick, and I don't believe it's constructed of brick, right? It's constructed of tilt wall or whatever it is.
The
they're
two
using.
facades.
The facade,
Yes,
not the
of brick.
construction.
Yes,
Got it.
yes.
One more question here. Let me find it. On G2, freestanding signs, it says in here that each business within the PD shall be restricted to displaying signage on no more than one single freestanding sign along the interstate. So does that mean each business gets a freestanding sign, or you're going to have, because the site plan reflected something different, and I just didn't know if that
Yes.
language aligned with what you're attempting to do here.
Yes, so if you go to, give me a second to find the exhibit of this signage plan. There is a little graphic in the corner that
shows,
shows
right.
proposed freeway signage. And so it's essentially saying that if a tenant has a smaller little plaque within that
Okay.
signage, they'd be limited to
So they'll be able to do it
one.
on one of those, one of
Mm-hmm.
the ones there. Okay. That's all the questions I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Norwood, did you have questions?
Yeah.
All right, then Vice Chairman Landine, and then I have a few questions just to set the table.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a question around the pedestrian-oriented plaza. Can you point in one of your slides where that might be?
Yes. So you want, yeah, you're talking about the big green space?
Yes.
It's in the very center of the project.
So is that where the restaurants are going?
Yes.
Adjacent to the 90-foot tall garage?
That's correct.
Which is the first floor being amenitized?
That's correct.
Okay. Have you considered amenitizing the ditch H?
Well, it's not our property.
No, not the ditch itself, but the view towards that.
Well, we're kind
In
of
phase one.
restricted by certain types of trees, but I think we're showing, those shade trees? Yeah, those are shade trees, the trees that you see there. You mean the building itself?
Yes, the
Oh.
garage.
Amenitized in what way?
Like you have a very deep green space back there, and then, there's really nothing for 500 feet. And I'm just wondering, why not monetize that as well?
With trees and, yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, you're mentioning the retail is inside, and that doesn't look too deep to me. I think
So the retail's on the other building.
if that sidewalk is 5 feet wide, then there's not much green space to actually have outdoor or retail, or the concept that you're proposing proportionately doesn't fit there.
So, okay, let me make sure I understand. Are you talking about the garage where the retail is going to be, not the garage that's up against the bayou, right? You're talking about the other garage?
I'm talking about both. So what I'm saying is that, yes, I understand that in Phase 2, Garage 2, which is the 90-foot tall garage,
Right.
will have first floor of retail and restaurants
That's correct.
in that pedestrian area. But based on the proportions, it doesn't look deep enough to be that amenity that you're showing pictures of.
So that, it's
And-
actually a bigger area than it's hard to get a grasp of how big that is. So the diagram that I showed you, the picture of those, actually is smaller than that area. You know, where the restaurants have, yeah, when you're saying that, that's a very thin strip, but that's one consistent. This is going to go from a small to a large. So you can actually have dining out there. You can have, we're going to have a lot of activities that you can do out there as well.
So to expand on that, let's just say building where you see number 3,
Yes.
it has a backside to that plaza?
Yep. And that's where the restaurant would be, facing the plaza.
Okay, so that orangish color is representative of a canopy or something,
Canopy, correct.
or a stoop for a restaurant. So that corner could be a restaurant.
Yeah, we're planning on that being a restaurant. Anything that faces that plaza, we're planning on activating. Yes.
Okay. Next, the driveways on Lexington, the curb cuts along Lexington. You have 2 curb cuts. What is the distance between those 2 curb cuts, and does it meet the City of Sugar Land requirement? And does the City of Sugar Land have a requirement?
Yes, they do. So they have to be a minimum, I believe, 165 feet apart. So that was one of the original comments when this application was first submitted, was ensuring that those 2 driveways did meet that spacing requirement.
And 165 feet between the 2 of them, and then it goes over the bayou, right? Or it's a dead end?
Sorry, where?
Yes,
It goes over the bayou.
it goes over the bayou.
Yeah, Lexington Boulevard continues on.
Okay, so that's practically the end of that development right there. Okay. What is the parking ratio? The parking looks really high. Am I imagining, or?
So the parking within the final development plan, within the general provisions, it says that this site will be parked at the 1/200 parking ratio, which is the parking ratio for medical offices as well as shopping centers. So that is to accommodate all the uses.
Okay. So that includes the surface parking and the garage altogether, 1/200? Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Taylor?
A couple things on the fact that we have 2 exhibits with the one without a curb cut and one with. Jessica, is there guidance from you all? Like, do we want to omit one of those exhibits from the PD, or does it matter?
It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
It still allows flexibility. The reason that we were keeping it in there is because they were waiting on that text dot approval. We're going to keep it in there just in case anything happens with that text dot approval, but both site plan layouts have been evaluated and reviewed by staff.
When I first saw 2 site layouts, I was having flashbacks to one of the previous plans that we considered, so I was glad it was just about a curb cut. On the permitted uses, I'm curious about a couple things. One is on the retail side, given what we created with the overlay district over here for Little Woodrow's, is there consideration of or desire on the part of the applicant to potentially go ahead and account for that in the process of approving this PD?
So if you open up Exhibit B3 at the final development plan, bar and wine bars are listed as permitted uses. So under retail, it's going to have bar, which Little Woodrow's would be classified as a bar, and then it also has retail sales small, which is anything that's less than 6,000 square feet, restaurants with no drive-through, and then wine bar are all listed.
Oh, gotcha. I'm sorry so the fact that there was not a permitted use of bar over there.
Yes,
so-
that's
okay,
the
got it.
standard zoning district of B2, which didn't
I
allow
was
for
making sure we
bars.
didn't need that overlay. I was thinking it was something about the outdoor use
Yeah.
of the outdoor space, so apologies for that. I just have to ask, permanent makeup sounds a lot like tattoos. Is
It's
that?
not.
Okay. I don't even
It's
want to know what that
specifically
is, but
not like regular tattoo parlor. It's imagine like your eyebrows.
got it. Okay. I'll leave that to somebody else.
Let's move on.
All right. Can you back up a few slides to get the entire track in there? Yeah, this one here. What are the other, whether it's the University LP, what we'll call the City of Sugar Land tract, are those, what are the current zoning on either one of those?
So for this one, this is currently zone PD, but it's an expired PD. It was for the relocation of Floor Campus here. So right now, this one is awaiting a new final development plan.
So does that mean that it's sitting there without any zoning
It
at
has
the moment?
it has no development rights on it currently.
Okay.
And then this property right here, Texas Instruments, that's zone BO, that's our standard office district. This is the city's property. This is the same zoning district as these other properties. It's R1I, it's that interim zoning. Because the city owns it, there's no need to rezone it at this time. And then these properties are all owned by MD Anderson, which is also exempt from zoning.
Okay. I guess my sort of bottom line question here is there's a lot of, in the commentary on the front end of all of this it talks about the regional activity centers and that sort of thing. I'm curious, as the rest of this unfolds, recognizing that we have the UT system planning to develop MD Anderson. I won't even ask you to comment on the status of that or when we could expect it, but we just know that that's out there, and we're excited about that. I guess my question is, if what I'll call the university track, sort of on the back side of the development, does not include residential, doesn't that then result in it not actually being a regional activity center?
So yeah, so the University Regional Activity Center does say that it allows for residential, but it is seen as an office and entertainment-centric district. So it has in the land use plan, those pie charts, I don't know if you guys are familiar with those pie charts, it's a smaller ratio in this rack for residential. It is a higher of entertainment and office.
And given the discussions that this commission's been having recently around housing, do we think that holds up? Do we anticipate there to be, since there is no zoning there and a PD could come forward, that will the city prioritize housing as a part of things moving forward? Or because a lot of this is it meets the conditions of the land use plan. If there's no housing, then it doesn't actually meet the conditions of the land use plan. So can you just help me reconcile?
Yeah. So it's, I hate to say it, but first come, first serve. I think you've seen it with some of the other multifamily projects when it has in the land use plan, the allowances for that, and then it's capped out. It's kind of the same thing for this. So it's being evaluated as the sites are progressing at the ratios that are identified in the land use plan, but there's always a chance for, if that's not what is identified for that area, if the idea for it has changed, there's an opportunity to go and amend the land use plan, as we've seen with some of the other racks.
Do you think this is asking you to speculate, I guess, but if a plan comes forward that does not include housing, is that something the city would be interested in moving forward?
I don't think I can speak on that this time. I think we would need to receive an application to determine that for that site.
And given the fact that there is no zoning on there at this time, presumably you could, I guess maybe the question is what type of projects would, because staff is going to talk to applicants before we see anything on paper like this. So what are the types of criteria that you all are thinking about to make most use of that university tract?
Supporting the surrounding uses, specifically Smart Financial, making sure that there is retail that's going to support that when people come to Smart Financial. We've heard complaints there's nowhere to eat. So we are really looking to make sure that when an application comes in, that there's going to be retail and services that support Smart Financial, so that people can come, drive, park their car, have a night, an evening in the area, and then walk to Smart Financial. That's kind of the number one priority that we want to see with an application that comes in. And then also making sure that, again, as the land use plan identifies, that buildings really should taper as the edge of the rack is adjacent to residential. So this, can't see my mouse. Where'd it go? So as the ditch runs along here, we want to make sure that it's lower intensity uses that are placed along here, whether that's lower buildings or could be residential, it could be townhomes, something like that.
So I guess part of the challenge that we've seen over the years is that there are, and we experience it here in Town Center, right, where there's not enough housing to support residential, restaurants, entertainment, and the like. So I guess, I would just like that as you all are moving forward through the remainder of this track, we should either not call it a regional activity center, or we should prioritize housing in that remaining tract.
Okay.
And I don't know how we codify that guidance from the commission or the request or the plea, whatever we want to call it. But I do think that that's important as we move through this, recognizing that the remainder of the tract is spoken for, right? And so, I guess I'm a little bit reacting to your first come, first serve comment as well, that, if something that looks akin to the, kind of McAllister's Wallace Bank type that comes forward and drops in there, and then it moves forward through the process, it puts us in a real bind because we're not in a position, I guess we could always express disapproval, but when it kicks to council, things get down the road. And I would hate to see a missed opportunity here to build out what was originally envisioned for this space, for this entire tract. We have to prioritize additional residential in this space in order to realize the full vision of what was originally thought for to be around Smart Financial. So I think hopefully I made my point, but and let me say this, none of these comments, I think I applaud PCD for bringing this forward. I think that the extra steps that Don and PCD are taking to activate the space and make it more than just a simple MOB is really to be commended. And I think we should really applaud the applicant and hope that he goes and tells his friends. So I'll leave it there, and I'm sure the chairman has some comments.
Did you want to address any of that?
I was just going to expound upon that a little from what you were asking. Yes, most certainly we are in support of residential. I think this 8-acre site, with it being directly adjacent to MD Anderson, lends itself for the FDP that's before you. Conversations that we've had on the remainder of that tract have all involved some form, whether that's townhome development or even multifamily development on that site, which is guided by our land use plan. So we're aware, and anything that we have that comes through for, hey, let's take a look at it, definitely has that housing component to it. And as Jessica mentioned, with it tapering off with some of that density, but having it. And then there's also the city's property. There's a lot of temporary parking that's out there. no one likes the density word, but there were options for density that we had on those tracks also. So we are keeping it in mind, and we hear you when you're asking us those things of keeping that housing first. We most certainly are keeping housing first.
Thank you.
Yes, sir, thank you.
Yeah, just a couple of questions and a comment or two. First of all, thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you, Don, for the presentation. I candidly wish that all the presentations we got were this detailed, including with the drawings and the pictures and the level of preparation that went into this. So I think it was great. I think this is an appropriate development for this area, and again, I applaud the thinking that went into that and the concept. That having been said, I do want to ask a few questions. First of all, this property is currently zoned single-family residential R1I, right?
Correct.
Okay, just looking at it now, it looks like a terrible place to put residential. So my question is, how in the world did this get zoned residential?
Yes, that's a
in the
great
first
question. So R1I is the standard interim zoning district that's placed on a property. So within the development code, it says that once a property is annexed into the city, R1I, unless otherwise denoted in the ordinance of annexation, is placed on the property. So that's why that is on there.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you for that. Second question is, I want to echo some of Vice Chairman Landine's comments on this. When I first looked at this and thought, okay, you're taking something that's zoned residential and you're making it something else. Okay, I'm over that. I mean, that's fine. But, you know, there are a lot of representations that are getting made with respect to the materials here as to this being a regional activity center. I noted that in the public meeting that was referenced in the materials, it was referred to as a mixed-use project, and I think that's accurate. Although the city's definition of a RAC, and I've got it here on the phone, includes a residential component, and so I think that's where some of the sensitivity comes when we're told, well, this qualifies because it's multi-use. Okay, but there's a larger vision in play here. And I know you've already addressed that, but I do think that's important. And keep in mind too that in the materials here, you know, you're telling us that, and I don't mean this in a critical way, but you know, on the face of it, you're telling us that this is primarily focused on professional and medical office with limited services and retail. You know, the vision seems more expansive than that, and certainly the vision of a RAC is much more expansive to that. And so while I do think that this is appropriate use and designation for this particular track, I do think it's important to have the bigger picture in mind as well. And if I were going to formulate that into a question, I would just say, well, how does this qualify as a RAC? And then you could say some of the things presumably that you've already said. So I will leave that as well. And it sounds to me like in general, I saw a picture somewhere of the February 17th meeting, but is it fair to say that the public response to that was positive?
I would say it was majority positive. There were definitely people, again, who didn't want to see development on this tract. It's vacant. They would like to remain vacant. But majority of the people were like, if there's going to be any development on this site, we're happy to see that this is what's proposed.
Okay, that's great. And then with respect to Exhibit B3 on the permitted uses, just a couple questions. Mm-hmm. The retail uses, I think it was answered. A couple questions on the services. One of the permitted services, and these, if it's listed here, that's permitted by a matter of right under the PD, correct? Okay, assembly.
I do want to make one thing. There are some supplemental regulations for some of the permitted uses under services. So for child care facility, daycare, and then place of worship, there are supplemental regulations listed under them. So they're not technically permitted by right unless they comply with those.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask about, and I appreciate that. And I remember, we've seen a matrix or something on there in the code about
the
what's a matter of right and what's not. Okay, assembly facility, banquet, event center. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, so it's kind of a broad category for an assembly facility. So it could range from an actual event center where you're hosting birthday parties or something, or it could be an event center as in like a conference center. Okay. So it's an assembly facility.
Okay, and place of worship has to, when it says permitted only as an accessory use within an office building, would you remind us what that means, please?
Yes, it's similar to, which in an amendment to the development code that passed last April, I believe, we removed this term, but ancillary, that use of it's not supposed to stand on its own. It's supposed to be in support of typically an office development, or in the standard code, it was also industrial. So it's supposed to be, limited to 2,000 square feet. It's not supposed to stand on its own. So it's supposed to be in support of like an office use if they want to have that kind of a place of worship for the people who work there to go.
Okay. And are there, and remind me, I'm sorry, I don't recall the answer to this, but for any of these permitted uses, are there any hours restrictions at all based on the use?
No.
Okay. And are there any other hours of operation restrictions that are contemplated for this PD?
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you. At this time, we'll do
Can I
consideration
ask one
and
question real
action.
quick? I'm so sorry.
Oh.
Commissioner Landy mentioned something, which I appreciate. And I wanted to ask, if we're going into this area that he talked about, there's also the area where they were going to have a conference center and a hotel. But before all that happens, are we going to have a traffic study? Because that is the biggest concern for District 4.
For,
I guess this is the first of this area we're seeing. But before we see all the different things that are coming, are we going to be seeing a traffic study?
those will be done. So for this site, this was the one that was the former final development plan for the floor campus. So it's identified on the Telfair General Land Plan as office currently. But when a new FDP comes through, which is what's identified on the General Land Plan, a traffic impact analysis would be required for that. And then as well as anything that happens to the city property, the city would run those numbers to see for any proposed use.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, let's move on to consideration action. I will make a motion that we recommend approval of the proposed rezoning of 8.041 acres from interim standard single-family residential district R1I to Lexington Commons Plan Development, Final Development Plan, located between U.S. Highway 59 and Lexington Boulevard along ditch site H, further described as 8.041 acres of land located in the Alexander Hodge League, Abstract 32, and being a portion of Track 5, Part 5, as described in slide number 1655B and 1656A FBCPR.
Second.
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, let's vote. And that passes 8-0. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Mr. Jansen. Thank you, commissioners. We will move on now to item 5A, consideration of an action on Rye Hill Section 1 preliminary plat.
Hello again. So, as
Long
always.
time no see.
I know. As always, I've included the preliminary plat background slides. So, just as a reminder, the purpose of a preliminary plat is to lay out lots and streets to ensure they conform and meet all the minimum lot sizes and right-of-way widths. Reserves and access are shown on a preliminary plat where applicable, but master notes, signature blocks, proposed easements are not shown, and their preliminary plats are also not recorded at the county. Something that was discussed at the last meeting as well is that dimensions are not required to be shown to the 100th decimal. They can be shown to the nearest whole number, so that is what you will see with this preliminary plat. And because it includes residential, a box exhibit is also required. The purpose of a box exhibit is to demonstrate that the proposed lots meet the required minimum lot width at the front building line. It does not represent a building footprint or pad. Boxes are provided for non-perpendicular lots. They're not required for all lots, just non-perpendicular, but they can be shown for both. And then boxes must be placed along the shortest tangent to the required front building lot line to show that that meets the minimum width. Again, because this plat is in the Rye Hill development, just a quick overview. The City of Sugar Land entered into a development agreement with Pulte Homes on December 5th of 2023. It's for a proposed approximately 960-acre master plan mixed-use community in the city's ETJ. It's a mix of approximately 2,335 single-family residential and Del Webb residential lots, which are 55 and up. This specific section is just for single-family residential, and the Rye Hill development will also include approximately 60 acres of flex commercial use north of FM 2759. So for this preliminary plat, it's section 1 of Rye Hill. It consists of 43.038 acres of single-family residential with 142 lots, 6 reserves, and 4 blocks. The lots within this section range from 40 to 50 foot wide, with the corner lots being an additional 10 feet in width. And access for this section is provided via Rye Hill Parkway, which is the collector roadway through the development. Here is an excerpt from the general land plan. As you can see, this is section 1 that includes the drill site, the detention pond, and then the lighter yellow denotes the single-family residential land use. So here is the proposed preliminary plat. It has a reserve here for the detention pond, the reserve here for the drill site, as well as a few landscape open space reserves. Here is the box exhibit. This section has 2 points of access to Rye Hill Parkway, and boxes are provided for lots that are non-perpendicular. Just a reminder, plotting since 2019, the Commission has 3 options when reviewing preliminary and final plots. The Commission may approve with conditions, or disapprove with an explanation. The approval with conditions and the disapproval with explanation both require citing code, and a plotting guide has been provided today. And with that, staff is recommending approval of the proposed Rye Hill Section 1 preliminary plat.
Thank you. Questions for staff?
I just had one clarifying question. So it says in here that it meets all of the regulations in Chapter 5 of the Development Code. So as any of these plats are in a preliminary state, what's the process if there's updates to the Development Code to roll that back into back into all of the different developers as they're developing their final plats?
So they would be vested at the time of their preliminary plat because their final plat has to be in general conformance with their preliminary.
So is there anything that updates them? Like if they're looking at, they're aware of what the Development Code is now and there was a change, do you all reach out to all of the different developments that are in process to update them, or how's that done?
We don't have a process for that right now. We're still in the process of figuring out as we go through and include more development code updates, but right now we don't have a process for reaching out to developers.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions for staff?
Sorry, everyone. I was just going to add, so also this area is covered through a development agreement, so we negotiated specific development requirements and standards. And so in this case, there's also provisions that acknowledge that if there's changes along the way, which version, I guess you could say, of the regulations that apply. So
I have a question.
Some of that
What's the name of the development agreement?
Sorry, what was that?
What's the name of the development agreement?
The name of the development agreement is Pulte Homes Ltd. Between City of Sugar Land and Pulte.
And no aspect of that has been before P&Z before, correct?
Correct. No, development agreements are negotiated by City Council, and it's at their discretion and approval.
Right. Do y'all mind if I ask a question?
Sure.
So since this is the first time I think P&Z has heard anything related to this development agreement, could you give us just a 30-second summary of the development agreement?
Sure. I will try my best. So we entered into a development agreement with Pulte in 2003. It covers a variety of things. 2023. It includes the general land plan that you have used as a reference as you go through the planning process. So establishing the major land uses, roads throughout the development. It also touches on things like utilities, fire service, trying to think of some of the other things off the top of my head, parkland dedication requirements and how that will be handled through this development. The establishment of a MUD that, yes, thank you, that
okay.
for
Is
this
there like
area.
a global vision for this development?
A global vision, meaning, the land plan, is that what you're kind of referring to?
No,
That maps out the land uses?
Is it like 55 plus? Is it
So there's a portion of it that is, that will be a Dell Web 55 plus kind of type portion in kind of the center of the community. And then, yes, and then, which you can see there kind of in more vibrant, bright yellow in this area here.
That is helpful.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and then what we're calling is the standard single family, even though the Dell Web portion will be single family in nature as well, or will be single family. The remainder is also single family. There are a couple locations for options for a future fire station to serve the area, as well as some amenity areas, buildings and facilities to serve the development.
Thank you. You answered my questions.
Okay,
That's great.
very good.
Any other questions for staff? I will make a motion that we approve the Rye Hill Section 1 preliminary plat. Is there a second?
A second.
I've got a second from, was that you, Sapana?
Yeah.
Okay, I just making sure. I've got a second from Commissioner Patel. Any other discussion? Please vote. That passes 8-0. Thank you very much, Commissioners. Thank you, staff. We will move on to item 6A, workshop, review of and discussion on proposed amendments to the Sugarland Development Code. Hello.
I'm back.
Triple duty.
Okay, so this workshop is just to provide an overview of a proposed development code amendment that staff is proposing and hoping to bring forward at the March 27th meeting. So just an overview of what this workshop will entail. It'll be a background as to why we're bringing forward the development code amendment, a summary of the proposed changes to chapters 2, which is the zoning regulations, 5, the subdivision regulations, and 10, definitions. Those amendments include amendments to the Lake Point redevelopment district regulations, amendments to the subdivision regulations, and then minor updates to some definitions. I'll also go over some next steps and then allow for questions and providing initial feedback. So as some background, the proposed amendment is part of staff's ongoing effort to modernize and streamline the code. Over the last 2 years, we've brought forward quite a few amendments to the development code just because it's a little outdated, and so we want to make sure that we're keeping up with the current development standards. And in addition to the Lake Point redevelopment district being adopted in December of 2023, and then in a recent amendment to it in June of 2024, staff developed a subdivision regulations task force in July of 2024 with the primary focus of reviewing the subdivision regulations as well as the city's design standards to ensure alignment with these new regulations, because they do include things that are different than our standard single-family residential, including some new housing types and some, I would say, more compact development regulations. And the task force is comprised of multiple departments, including public works, utilities, redevelopment, police, fire, engineering, parks, and planning. And the proposed amendment is also in alignment with one of the city's all-in initiatives of fostering sensitive redevelopment. This is one of 5 all-in initiatives that were a part of the strategic action plan that was just adopted by City Council. 2 of the key objectives of this all-in initiative is fostering a redevelopment-friendly environment, which includes updating codes and policies to encourage strategic development, as well as preparing key sites for redevelopment by leveraging land in key areas, specifically Lake Point and Imperial. So just to provide some regulatory background, because in the past, the development code updates that you guys have seen have been just to Chapter 2 or to Chapter 10. Chapter 2 is the zoning regulations, Chapter 10 is the definitions. But the development code also includes Chapter 5, which is subdivision regulations, and then outside of the development code or the design standards. And so I just wanted to provide some background, since 2 of these chapters will be included in this proposed amendment, and then there are references to the design standards. So the purpose of the zoning regulations is to regulate land uses in the city through zoning districts. It establishes procedures for the review and approval of site plan packages in zoning cases. So those are rezoning, CUPs, variances, and special exceptions, which the commission looks at rezoning and CUP applications. And it provides requirements for zoning districts and land uses, off-street parking, and landscaping and screening. So typically this is when it's reviewed at a site plan or building permit level, and the zoning regulations are administered by planning staff. The subdivision regulations, the purpose of them is to provide minimum requirements for the platting and development of subdivisions in the city and the ETJ. It establishes procedures for the review and approval of plats, general land plans, and subdivision variances. And it provides requirements for subdivision design, parkland, and public sites and driveways. So this is typically when we will apply these regulations to plats, like tonight's plat. This is subdivision regulations basically provide the guidelines for those type of reviews, and they're administered by both the engineering and planning departments. And then we have the design standards, which are located outside of the development code, and the purpose is to provide requirements, procedures, and technical standards for construction plans. It establishes procedures for the review and approval of public infrastructure projects, which are reviewed through construction plans. And it provides requirements for utility design, so for water systems, drainage, sanitary and sewer, and then roadway design. So the next few slides are just going to be kind of an overview of the summary of changes that were provided in the agenda packet. So beginning with Chapter 2, the first amendment that's proposed is in Section 2-6. It essentially lays out the guidelines for site plan package requirements. And currently it says that site plan packages are required for non-residential uses and for townhomes, but because multiplexes were added to the adoption of the Lake Point Redevelopment District, we wanted to make sure that multiplexes would also be reviewed through that same procedure. So that's what that edit is for. To Section 2-119, this starts to go into the Lake Point redevelopment regulations. When the regulations were initially adopted back in 2023, it included a minimum and maximum block length that applied only to the Lake Point redevelopment district, and it was smaller than what was in the subdivision regulations because it was supposed to allow for more compact development. But we found that that's probably not the most appropriate location for those requirements, so they were removed to the subdivision regulations. And then, as well in that section, we provided clarification that trees and shade structure shall be used to provide shade to pedestrians within the pedestrian realm. The pedestrian realm is also something that is specific to the Lake Point Redevelopment District. And we provided clarification that the shade structure shall be used to provide shade when on-street parking is located within the pedestrian enhancement zone, and that a minimum vertical clearance shall be provided for shade structures if utilities are located under the clear zone, which is part of the pedestrian realm, which is also just the sidewalk. And this came out of discussions with our utilities and engineering departments that if utilities are located in that area, that those shade structures need to be at a certain height so that they can get their equipment in. Continuing with this section, we also removed some driveway separation requirements that conflicted with the driveway separation requirements in the subdivision regulations. So we removed that and just renamed the subsection cross-access and left those requirements. And then we added in reference to the design standards for those on-street parking design and construction. And then for Section 2-120 pedestrian realm enhancements, we clarify that pedestrian skilt lighting and poles and bollards should be spaced at even intervals and complying with the city's design standards. Because of the amendment that was passed in June of 2024 that allowed for on-street parking within that pedestrian enhancement zone, we removed that minimum spacing requirement because it would conflict if there was parking there. And then we also removed that tree spacing requirement and instead provided a minimum requirement of trees based off the street frontage. So that allowed a little bit more flexibility to place trees to provide shade, but not having it be so rigid that you have to place it 1 per 25 feet. Bless you. For Section 2-121, there was language added that allows for the civic space that's described in the Lake Point Redevelopment District to satisfy the parkland dedication requirements that are in the subdivision regulations. And it allows for if the civic space contains recreational amenities that are described in Section 530.6 in the subdivision regs, and the Parks and Recreation Director approves the proposed recreational amenities. And then to Section 2-122, Building Design, Middle Housing Development, part of those amendments that were added in June of 2024 was the addition of mews. And originally the minimum width was 15 feet. This is increasing it to 30 feet in order to accommodate utilities. Moving on to Chapter 5, which is again subdivision regulations. The subdivision regulations chapter has its own set of definitions, so we just added a few references to Chapter 10 for definitions that were not included but were referenced in this chapter. For Section 5-19 streets, it currently stated that single-family residential shall have frontage on an approved public or private street. For this development, since we had added regulations that allowed for homes in the Lake Point redevelopment district to front on that MU, which is an open space or a civic space, which is something like a trail in the Lake Point area, we needed to change those requirements to align for when comes time for platting of those residential developments to align with those zoning regulations. We also removed the minimum pavement width for non-residential alleys, since that was already something that was covered in the design standards, and we didn't want it to conflict should any changes happen to the design standards. And then we also added clarification that residential alleys are only required if it's required by zoning, because currently it states that they're not required but may be allowed. So we wanted to make sure that it was clear that residential alleys are required for certain areas if it's required by the zoning district, like the Lake Point redevelopment district. And then we also added prohibition of dead-end alleys, and then allowed 2 exceptions for temporary in terms of construction sites. And then if there are site-specific unique circumstances that do not allow you to comply with this, that the city engineer may allow for those allowances. And then to Section 520 for blocks, that is where we moved those regulations that were previously in the Lake Point redevelopment district. And then to Section 5-30 parkland dedication, that was where that language was also mirrored, that was added to the Lake Point code. And then to Chapter 10, there were just minor modifications to 2 definitions. One, adding clarifications to the MUSE definition that utilities may be located in there, and then added townhomes to the middle housing definition, since that was included in the Lake Point redevelopment district. We wanted to make sure that that was aligning. So next steps, staff is prepared to bring forward the final draft of the proposed development code amendments at the March 27th meeting, where we're anticipating public hearing followed by consideration action. And then we're also anticipating bringing forward the first reading of the ordinance as well as a public hearing at City Council at the April 15th meeting. And I'm available to answer any questions.
In connection with that, when it comes back to us on the 27th, are you asking us for a recommendation of approval to council for this?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you. Questions for staff? I have a couple. Oh, go ahead.
Thanks for the overview. I got a couple questions. One is around, we're adding back in this, it's in section 2.6, it's site plan packages for multiplexes. And we've sort of added that back in, and I know it causes a lot of confusion, and there's not a definition for it either if you go back into the definition. So is there a possibility we can get rid of this terminology? Because I know even with the Imperial discussion that was just had, it was a public meeting, this caused a bit of questions because nobody understood what it meant.
So multiplex was adopted, the definition of multiplex was adopted with the Lake Point redevelopment district.
Understand that, but I didn't see it in these definitions.
So it's in Chapter 10. Sorry, I'm trying to...
Did I miss it?
I don't see it on page 10.
It's under dwelling multiplex. Sorry, I'm trying to find the page reference.
ABC. Dwelling, two-family, fourplex, triplex. See, we don't.
It's on page 4. There's a definition under live work, dwelling, live work.
So it's dwelling multiplex on page 4 of the Chapter 10 section. Dwelling multiplex means the following residential use types as defined in the development code: triplex dwelling, fourplex dwelling, and sixplex dwelling. And this was adopted in 2023 with the Lake Point redevelopment district.
Yeah, I understand that. I know we had that conversation. Okay. We said, okay, it's in this, but it seems like, one, it's buried, so it's hard to find if you have to look for it in dwelling. But I do know that when it comes up and we've got the zoning, it within the nature of what this is and having to go back in and saying, okay, it's a combination of all of this, it's, yeah, it's just confusing. And I think it's hard to explain to the
Okay.
public.
Would the preference be removing the definition and only referring to the actual
Yes.
dwelling types?
Well, that would be
Okay.
my suggestion. I don't know where the rest of the commissioners are on that. But I mean, I think we need to simplify the different types of housing, particularly as we go in, you know, to the different things that we're planning in Imperial, to be very specific on the type of housing that's planned for that particular area. I don't know where you guys are at with that, but
So, if I may,
sure.
yeah, I mean, my comment on that is if the intent is whenever the term multiplex is used, that it means that you're referencing or allowing a triplex, a fourplex, or a sixplex. If you want anyone to read any of those things into it, then I think it's fine. But I think to Commissioner Smith's point is, if what you're calling for is a more specific, then it needs to call out triplex, fourplex, or sixplex, right? But if the idea is there's a reference to it somewhere, and any of these three things, meaning triplex dwelling, fourplex dwelling, or sixplex dwelling, would be appropriate there, or is what's being referred to, and you just want to put multiplex so you don't have to list those three things out every time.
And I think,
I get that.
And I know that we talked about this with the Lake Point, but I know something else that came up is a sixplex, or when you get into threeplex, does that mean it's 3 buildings, or does it mean it's 3 buildings up?
So in the definition for sixplex, it's one building, but it can be vertically or horizontally integrated, those units.
I just know that it may be some more education with the public, because I can just, there was questions like that came out in the meeting that we had about Imperial.
So to this specific one, would the preference be that this is just, instead of saying multiplex, listing out each of these in this specific instance?
Or in the definition, call out multiplexes and say it's a combination of this and make it very specific, that when we refer to that, it's a grouping of these different types of.
I think that's what it does.
That's what the definition currently states, that it includes, it's a culmination of all those units. So all those are already defined, and then multiplex is just used as a reference to those 3 different types of dwelling units as a combined term.
Right, but you don't find that unless you go down a dwelling and look within the.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If we're in the definition saying, hey, when we say this is what we mean.
Yeah. Okay. For this instance, I'll go ahead and mark this out, and we'll
Just know
just change it
this
to
term
refer.
in general is causing confusion.
We can capitalize it as multiplex since it's a defined term in the definitions.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's why I didn't capitalize it. It's not the direct term. Okay. Okay. So is dwelling, multiplex, capitalized sufficient?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm fine with either. I can list them out. I can change it. I can do it.
I understand there's not a desire to list them out, but somewhere I think it's got to be that clear that that's what that means.
Okay.
How many units can there be in a multiplex?
So it's 3 different types. It can be a triplex, a quadplex, or a sixplex. So it could be either be 3, 4, 6 units.
So if I was going to wordsmith that, I would say multiplex means one or more of the following residential use types,
Ooh, let me get back to that.
Very good.
as defined in the development code.
Well, is it one or more, or is it one? Could be one or the other. Or the other.
Okay. Is there a recommendation to change the definition of multiplex?
It makes sense to me personally.
Okay.
It makes sense to me as written, but I'm just trying to get the clarity that,
Well, when I'm getting back to, I've now been to a couple of just the meetings that you all have had with the public, and when you say multiplex, people don't know what that means.
I'm going to expand on that a little bit from a different perspective.
Okay.
Anything that's more than 2 units is also an apartment by IBC definition.
So when the Lake Point redevelopment district was adopted, the multifamily definition was changed to say means more than 7.
More than 7 is then an apartment.
Correct. So that would be multifamily apartment, interchangeable terms.
So
yeah.
between a multiplex, which are 6 units, and an
Multiplex
apartment,
includes 3 different types of dwellings.
3 different, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we're changing the definition, we're saying one or the other. You have to select one, right? Either it's a duplex, 4-plex, or 6-plex.
So it's just a cumulative term to reference any of those units that are above 2, but lower than 7. So 3, 4.
So
it was just an easier way
That's
to
fine.
reference them.
No, I'm just clarifying.
Okay.
So if I'm looking at it from a developer
Yeah.
standpoint, so I come in and I say I want 7 units there.
You're multifamily.
So I'm multifamily. At 7th, I'm multifamily.
Yes.
That's the definition somewhere.
Yes, they're defined terms on page
Okay.
4 of chapter 10.
That's fine.
Okay.
I'm just clarifying.
Can I get direction on how to do for section 2-6?
I think if you go back to what we had talked about with just listing them out in parentheses, it would be helpful.
When it's referred to.
Refer to this,
Yeah,
or
so
this.
under the M section, put multiplex, and you would put like C dwelling unit, or
Yeah.
C work,
Boom, boom, boom.
live, work,
Yep.
comma, whatever. So if you were just looking, does that make sense? Okay, all right, let me try this, I hope I don't make this more complicated. Okay, I'm looking through I'm an interested person, and I'm looking through the definitions, and I want to find multiplex. So I turn to the M's, and it's not there.
Yes,
I have to know
it's under D. Yeah.
that if I missed it when I was reading sequentially on page 4, that it's under dwelling, comma, live, work, right? So one suggestion would be, under the M's, you put multiplex, and you put C, dwelling, live, work,
Okay.
Yes,
dwelling, comma, multiplex, page 4, so you could find it, like a cross-reference.
correct.
Okay?
Yep. That solves it. Okay. Okay. That was my one question.
And then I'll let staff think about whether this captures the intent, but again, for my money, I would suggest multiplex means one or more of the following residential use types as defined in the development code. Y'all think about that. All right, and hopefully that gets some clarity. Other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
The other one was around, I understand taking out the tree spacing and not making it specific, but what was also taken out was when you put the spacing as the size of the tree. So that means that if a developer comes in, they can just put in 2.5-inch caliper trees or 2-inch caliper trees versus the larger trees that you may want in as a screen.
Correct. So the way that we tried to address that was through, on page 3 of chapter 2, providing more of an intent statement, because out of the subdivision regulations task force meetings, our engineering and public works departments had concerns regarding the placement of large shade trees within the pedestrian enhancement zone because of the potential impact that it has to utilities in the area. And so that's why we made more of an intent statement that the trees should be used to provide shade, but not putting in a specific caliper and allowing the developer to use a tree that makes sense for the development. If that makes sense.
Yeah, so you're just going to leave it up to the developer to, so they could say, well, if
That's
I
right.
put in a 2-inch,
When they put a bonsai tree in, don't come back here.
right? Well, if I put a 2-inch oak tree, it might, be enough shade for, to cover it in, the next 5 years, because they grow a little bit slower versus a different kind of tree.
Yeah.
So who manages that or dictates, hey, we need to have these kind of trees this size?
With the
Be thoughtful on minimums.
minimums?
Be thoughtful on minimums.
Okay. So would the preference be that a caliper is added back or a specific tree species? Because that was,
I was just making an analogy there. I think the caliper tree is what needs to go back.
okay.
I would recommend the same calipers.
Just caliper? Okay, because the main concern of our utilities departments and public works and stuff was the type of trees, so shade trees, because they're so aggressive with their roots. They were having a lot of issues, as I'm sure you've seen in the First Colony area. Those live oak trees that are planted are disrupting sidewalks and utilities and stuff. And so that was the hesitation invitation to remove the reference to shade trees, but we can definitely add caliper back.
If that's the case, and you have a situation now where we, as an established community, know what these trees are doing, this might be a good time to go back and reinsert into the landscaping code specifically what type of species of
Yes.
trees you're looking about, shallow-rooted trees or
Yes.
whatever that is.
Yes.
And this may be a chance for you to have a launching spot for that.
Yes, our engineering and utilities departments and public works are already looking into that, and they're looking to add to the design standards different planting and tree size and species requirements for in the right-of-way.
The other one was when you took out the item on the driveway, and you made it what was it, the cross access?
Yes.
But it seems in that the requirement around being 50 feet away from like adjacent properties or from an intersection was lost.
So it goes back to, and I realize it's not in here because there were no proposed changes to that section, but there is its own article in the subdivision regulations, chapter 5, that has a table for minimum driveway spacing requirements. So for a local street, it's 75 feet. So that's why it was removed, because it conflicted with that.
Okay.
It was less than what was already approved in our standards.
Did I miss it? Did we have it in here?
No, there were no proposed changes to it, so that's why it wasn't included in there, but it can be provided in the next draft so you have that reference.
And the other question I had was on the civic spaces and the parkland. So when I think of a civic space, I think public. And if I go back to the definition that you guys went back to on page 17, it was, what is it, 17? I'm gonna go back into the right division. It mentioned, well, I must not have the page numbers right. Oh, here we are. It says that it may be met by private or recreational facilities as long as these facilities meet requirements of section 534, but we didn't have 534, so I didn't know really what other reference it was. But it seems to me if you're doing that and you're putting them together, they should all be public and not private.
Sorry, can you repeat the reference to the section?
So it is on page 17. I finally got in the right section.
Oh, I
of the
see. Okay.
Output. And it's section 530, and it's number 6.
Yes. Excuse me, Commissioner Smith, can you speak into your mic? They can't hear you.
Sorry, usually I don't have that problem with nobody being able to hear me.
In the definition of civic space, it actually says it can be privately or publicly owned. It's really just about access. It couldn't be an HOA that, you have to have a key card to get into it or something. It needs to be publicly accessible so that the development can access it in the Lake Point area.
But then what do you mean by private? I mean, it's like privately owned, but it needs to be
public
accessible.
Right. Right.
Okay. Well, that's what I was trying to make sure is that we were talking
It doesn't
about
dictate the ownership, just that it's available to the public or that it's open to the public.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then my other question, and this is just sort of just for clarity, is that you have a section 5.3 definitions, and then you have a chapter 10 for definitions.
It's very confusing.
Would it not be useful to just move everything to 10? Chapter 10?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of references back and forth.
There are, and it's confusing, and we try to make it a little bit clearer by adding some of those references. I believe it was from when these were in the Code of Ordinances and then moved to the Development Code. There was already definitions for these subdivision requirements, and then a chapter 10 was added. So that's definitely something we can look at in the future of combining and making it a little bit more clear. That's just how it's currently set up in the code.
Yeah,
it's confusing. Yes,
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay, thanks. That's all I had.
Anyone else?
One quick question for you. On page 2,
Okay.
you've got a definition of duplex. It says, see chapter 10 for definition. I could not find duplex in chapter 10. Are my eyes that old, or did I miss it?
Dwelling.
What's that?
It's dwelling duplex.
Okay, same thing then.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what you were railing on earlier.
We'll work on that
Okay. Never mind.
Any other questions? I had a couple, just a couple.
Okay.
All right. And then I'm going to actually revise, I think I'm going to revise my edit when we get there. Okay. 2-119, page 3. I'm going to make sure I'm reading this correctly. On D, pedestrians within the clear zone shall be provided shade through the use of trees or shade structures, such as awnings or canopies. Trees have to meet the requirements in section 2-120. Got it. Number 2, when on-street parking is located within the pedestrian enhancement zone, shade structures shall be utilized to meet this requirement. That means when on-street parking is located within the pedestrian enhancement zone, you can't use trees.
Correct, because trees would not be able to be planted there
That's
because the
fine.
parking will be there.
I just want to make sure that's the intent. That's perfectly fine. And then I think we've made this point, but in section 2-120, page 9, when you took out the caliper, I think you need to give a little bit. My suggestion is you need to give some additional guidance there. You can't just leave it at the whim of the reader. Okay, I'm now on 5-19 streets, page 6. On the red line to 3C, in the LPR district, middle housing lots shall have frontage on an approved public street, muse, or civic space, and vehicular access shall be provided via an alley. Okay? So I guess my question is this, and maybe a dumb question. But given the fact that I guess my question is, depending on what element of multiplex you're using, is it possible for each of those to have frontage on the same street? That question may not have made sense, but that's the best I can do for try one.
Can you rephrase?
Yeah, I was afraid you were going to say that. Okay, so what is it? I'm looking at, okay. It says middle housing lot. Oh, so the lot has the lot.
lots.
I got it.
Yes.
I answered my own question.
Okay.
Sorry. Yep, overcomplicated. All right, my bad. Clarification. Now I'm on, I think, 5-19F, page 14.
Okay.
Alleys, F2. Unless required by a property's zoning designation. And I want to make sure that section 5-19A3C is a zoning designation, because you have a call out there for using alleys as well. So let me see if I can clarify that a little bit. I just want y'all to know I read this. Okay, so page 6.
Yes.
519A3C. And vehicular access shall be provided via an alley. Okay? And then F2 says alleys shall not be required unless required by a property's zoning designation.
Yes. So that comes from in the Lake Point regulations. Let me pull up the page and chapter.
And if A3C is not a zoning designation,
It is in, it's in chapter 2, page 17, section 2-122. Oh, is that the right section? Nope, that's not the right section. Give me one second.
okay, am I just, again, I realize I'm the overcomplicator, but I have a hard time reading these things together. A3C says vehicular access shall be provided. That's mandatory.
Yes.
Via an alley.
Yes.
And then I read F2 And it says, unless a property zoning designation, alleys shall not be required.
Yes.
So if A3C isn't a zoning designation, you've now told people that you've required it and not required it.
Yes, so it goes back to the Lake Point redevelopment district regulations, which say that middle housing has to be accessed via private drive or alley. So the 5-19F for alleys, originally it just said that alleys were not required. And so it was allowing flexibility that if there were to be another zoning district that also required alleys, that it says that unless it's required by your property zoning designation, which it is for the Lake Point redevelopment district, alleys are not required. So for any other standard single-family residential in the city, say in R1, we're not requiring them to have alleys. So that's why it's written that way.
Is another way, is this also true that what you're stating here in 5-19A3C, you're just referencing what is in the zoning designation as well?
Correct. Because of the different ways that the zoning regulations and subdivision regulations are applied, adding this to A3C is just ensuring that when it comes time to platting, that there is consistency between the subdivision and zoning regulations.
Okay. Definition, dwelling, live, work. I think I would say dwelling multiplex means any of the following residential use types and not one or more. Okay? As defined in the development code. So that's that one, and that's all I got. Anyone else? Thank you for your patience. I usually don't commit myself, but I erred. All right, thank you. 1 second. Item 7A. Planning Zoning Commission Liaison Report from the March 4th City Council meeting.
That was me. Oh,
Go for it.
nothing material in that meeting for us.
Item 7B, City Staff Report. Do we have one of those? Did you draw a lot? Did you cast lots to see who was going to have to give that?
Rock, paper, scissors. Joking. Good evening again. You will have another meeting on March 27th where you're going to have a public hearing on the workshop that was just before you. And we anticipate having some plats also. So we have some full agendas coming up. So please expect to be having meetings going through April also.
Good. I'll give you my schedule for April and May later. All right. Any other business? Got a motion to adjourn by Commissioner Landine.
Second.
Got a second by Commissioner Smith. We are adjourned. Good night, everyone. It's the only time I get to do that.